Hello and welcome to episode 1 of Let's Translate Light Novels. In this series we're going to be looking at Seiranden. It is a light novel about Nakago's past, character from Fushigi Yugi. And in this particular video we're going to be looking at how Japanese onomatopoeia, as in like sound effects, straight up sound effects, are used in narrative prose and how they might be translated into English. But before we start, I have some notes and some disclaimers.
The objective of this series is not to walk away with a finished translation of this novel. In actual fact, we're probably only going to get through the first several pages. The purpose of this series is to teach Japanese grammar and vocabulary. Additionally, the series' objective is to show how you can take your understanding of Japanese and turn it into a proper translation. To demonstrate this, I'll be comparing and contrasting translations of this novel that I did in the year 2000 when I was at the intermediate level and completely new to translating, with translations from some of my patrons as well as my insights today as a professional translator with over 15 years experience. I do not own the rights to Seiranden, and I did not get permission from the author Nishizaki Megumi to translate it, so again, I would like to emphasize that the intention of this video series is not to produce a translation of this book, but to teach Japanese and to show how translation can be done. I won't be naming my patrons who have contributed their translations in these videos, but I will credit them in the video description if they wish. And now, on to the video.
Alright, so let's just jump into it. So the very first line of the novel is Oritachi tamae. So, tamae, this ending is very noble. It's very like, I always describe this sort of speech as King James Bible sort of speech. Sorry to those of you who did not grow up in church and did not look at King James Bible and all of its nuances, but basically it's like, it's how a king would speak to his subjects or how subjects would speak to their king. It's very noble. Or it's how you'd talk to a god or how a god would talk to you. And indeed, this line is said by somebody who's talking to a god. So if you look at the verbs, oriru, and tatsu. So oriru is to go down, like from a higher level to a lower level. And then tatsu is to rise or to stand from like a lower level to a higher level. So if you look at those two verbs together, they contradict each other, right? Together though, they mean like to descend, like from above, basically. So my patron translated this as descend from the heavens. This is a good translation. It shows that they're talking to a god. Descend from the heavens, even though from the heavens was not in the original Japanese, it is implied. Small Sarah, I'm just going to call myself Small Sarah. Basically, me when I was 18 years old, and this is like one of the first things I ever translated. I sat there with like a Japanese kanji dictionary where I had to look up all the kanji by brushstroke, and it took forever. And like my host dad helped me sometimes. I'd ask him what certain words would mean, and he'd explain to me in Japanese. But yeah, very inexperienced, intermediate level Japanese, Small Sarah. I just simply translated that as arise. So let's look at these two possible translations for Oritachi tamae. Descend from the heavens versus arise. Both of these are actually pretty good translations, and I'd say neither of them is really wrong. What's happening here is a person is commanding, sort of, to a god, to his god, to appear before them, to come to them. Descend from the heavens is a little more literally what they're saying. They're saying come down from where you are. I can't really speak on my thought process because, again, I did this over 20 years ago and I do not remember translating this. However, arise kind of works too, because you'll see later in the scene they're all gathered around a lake. So the implication could be either that their god is going to come down like on top of the lake, or that the god's going to come up from the lake. But I think the main reason that I might have chose arise, either I simply didn't really know what oritatsu meant and I didn't feel like looking it up, and I was like, it's probably this. Either that, or I knew that they were talking to Tenko, which if you've seen Fushigi Yugi, you know that Tenko is a devil. He's like Satan, basically. So we would think, oh, devils are down in hell. So if you're commanding a devil to come to you, you would say arise. So that's why I don't really think either of these are wrong. I think descend from the heavens is better, personally, today, but neither of them is exactly wrong. So the next line, this is a long sentence. It comes in two parts. Toshi oita otoko no hikui shiwagareta koe ga, comma. So that's part one of the sentence. Part two of the sentence is shikkoku no yami no haritsumeta kuuki wo furuaseta. I'm reading this kind of slow and stilted on purpose so that you can really hear the words. This isn't how like a fluent Japanese person would read this. It would not be so ba-ba-da, by the way. I see you in typing that comment right now. So anyway, Toshioita Otoko, an old man, no hikui shiwagareta koe. So shiwa is wrinkles. Shiwagareta is like hoarse. It's like, I'm an old man and I talk like this. So his shiwagareta, his hoarse, wrinkly, old sounding voice, ga. So the old man's low, deep, old sounding voice. Shikkoku no yami, jet black darkness. Haritsumeta kuki. So kuki is air or atmosphere. And then haritsumeta is like, it's tense, basically. So tense air, wo furuaseta. So furuaseta is the causative form of, it's to make someone shiver, quake, tremble, shake. Furueru is just to shiver, tremble, quake. But furuaseru is to make, to cause something else to shiver, tremble, or quake. So this old man's voice is making the jet black darkness quake. That's basically what this means. That's not a good translation, by the way. It's just what it means. So my patron translated this as an elderly man's low and hoarse voice. That's the first part. Made the tense air of the jet black darkness quiver. You may notice here, this patron left the Japanese period, maru. That's a rookie mistake. I used to do that a lot in some of my first translations that I did professionally. Like, if you have the Japanese text and you're overwriting it with English, it's really easy to accidentally leave Japanese punctuation in there. So like, be really careful of that. Yeah. So small Sarah translated this as an old man's deep voice trembled in the tense air in the darkness. So let's look at these two. Again, neither of these is exactly wrong. I do once again think that my patron's is better than small Sarah. In general, I think that this patron's translations for this section are better than small Sarah. But I mean, that's fair. Small Sarah had barely any experience when she did this, and she didn't know Japanese that well, to be perfectly honest. She was suffering from the Dunning-Kruger effect a little bit too, and she thought she knew more than she actually did. So an elderly man's low and hoarse voice versus an old man's deep voice. So here's something about Japanese prose. They tend to use a lot more adjectives than we would in English, and they tend to use a lot more adverbs than we would in English. Like, in English, it starts to sound a little excessive if you say, deep, hoarse voice. We try to find an adjective that expresses both deep and hoarse at the same time, or we might just pick one or the other. What I would probably do today is pick an adjective like gravelly, because that kind of implies hoarse and deep. But it's not wrong to say like hoarse, deep voice, or low and hoarse voice. So a low voice, that's a little stilted in English. We would say a deep voice, not a low voice. So that's one pointer. But yeah, small Sarah chose to just favor one adjective over the other. She probably didn't, to be honest, she probably just didn't really know what shiwagareta koe was and didn't feel like looking it up. So she's like, hikui, I know what that word is. I'm just going to use that. And she just favored deep voice. And then my patron translated both of them, low and hoarse. Again, deep is more what we would use in English than low, describing a voice. So my patron kept the Japanese verbiage in this second half of the sentence. Made the tense air of the jet black darkness quiver. Small Sarah, however, made this like not causative, all right? And it's wrong technically, but also not exactly too wrong. It's a bit nitpicky. Small Sarah said the man's deep voice trembled. It's the voice itself that trembled in the tense air in the darkness versus his voice caused the tense air to tremble. So if you're thinking about the order of operations here, the air was tense. The jet black air was tense. But then the old man with his gravelly voice saying, descend from the heavens or arise, oritachi tamae, that made the once tense air, the air that was formerly tense, tremble, shake. So small Sarah's translation of the deep man's voice trembled is not exactly correct because it's not the voice that is trembling. The voice is making the air shake. However, the wording of my patron's thing here, hoarse voice made the tense air of the jet blackness quiver. If you have that causative, like made, quiver, made, verb, if there's too many words between those two words, I feel like it kind of gets a little muddy and lost. So I would probably today translate like an elderly man's gravelly voice shook the once tense air, or the once still air, or shook the tense air in the jet black darkness, or something like that. I would probably assign like a more active verb to the man's voice rather than made this other thing quiver or shake. But again, neither translation is exactly wrong. I'd say my patron's is closer to what is like actually correct. But it's a little tiny bit wordy. So as a translation, it's good, it's pretty good, but it could be tightened up a little bit. That's just something to keep in mind. In general, as a translator, you always want to tighten things up as much as you can. That doesn't mean, you just flat out toss out words to make it shorter, but it means that you, like I said, you combine adjectives wherever you can. Instead of deep and hoarse, just say gravelly, because that means deep and hoarse. Stuff like that. And then they repeat it. Oritachi tamae, that line again. Osa no koe ni mura no otoko tachi no nobutoi koe ga tsuzuku. So this first kanji, it's pronounced so many different ways. You may recognize it. It's a beginning level kanji. It's nagai, but in this case it's pronounced osa, and it's for the chief or the head of a tribe or clan or village. So osa no koe ni, so at the sound of the chief's voice, mura no otoko tachi, the men of the village, no nobutoi koe ga tsuzuku. So if you look at the two kanji for nobutoi, no is like, it just means plains by itself, but it's often used like in the word yase, which means like wild or savage. So it often means like wild or savage. And then butoi, futoi is thick. So like throaty, savage, wild, manly men, basically. It's like, meh, oritachi tamae, instead of oritachi tamae. It's manly. At the sound of the chief's voice, the men of the villages, manly men voices, continued. So followed, I would say, for tsuzuku, instead of to continue, to follow, like followed after. Piggybacked off of the chief's voice. So the patron translated this as along with the chief's voice. So that's the tsuzuku. They translated that concept as along with. So following the chief's voice, along with the chief's voice. The throaty voices of the village men continued, and once again, Japanese maru, changed that to a period. Oh, okay, so they put continued twice. Tsuzuku is along with the chief's voice. So ni, particle ni is along. So along with the chief's voice, the throaty voices of the village men continued. Yeah, I'd say followed is a little clearer rather than continued in this case, but continued is more like a literal way of translating tsuzuku. And also note how in Japanese prose, it's present tense. And you'll find they mix it up all the time. This is the thing you're told as an English writer you're never supposed to do. You're never supposed to mix your tenses. You're always supposed to keep your verb tenses consistent when you're narrating a story. Like, she sat down by the lake and told him, I love you. And then he said, oh my goodness. And then he stood up and ran away. In Japanese, it will be something like, they sat below the lake, and then she says to him, I love you. Oh, he exclaimed. He stands up and runs away. Like, they would change the verb tense everywhere in Japanese prose, but you can't do that in English. So it was good of my patron to change tsuzuku, which is present tense, into continued past tense. So small Sarah translated that as, after the leader's voice, so I translated osa as leader instead of chief. That's not technically wrong, right? I think chief is a little bit better personally than leader. The voices of the other villagers, I did not assign a gender here, that's interesting, continued. Ah, I see what I did here. Yeah, and then the women's voices echoed. So you'll see why I did the voices of the other villagers continued and then the women's voices echoed. Where are these women's voices coming from? We didn't get to any women's voices yet. We will in the next sentence. So small Sarah, what she did is she kind of condensed the next two descriptive sections into one. I don't know why I did that. So don't ask me why I did that. I just did. Maybe, to be honest, I was translating this from a book, from printed text like this. It was not word processed originally. When I was translating this, I think I was doing it like in a notebook by hand, and my handwriting is really messy. And yeah, I mean, I might have just overlooked that there's another oritachi tamae between that descriptive line and the next descriptive line. So the next descriptive line, after yet another oritachi tamae, そして女たちの高音が響き渡る. So if you look at 高音, that kanji compound, again, it's two pretty elementary level kanji. It's high or tall, takai, and oto or ne, sound. So high sound. Hibiki wataru, again, that's two verbs smacked together. Hibiku is to echo, wataru is to go across, basically. So hibiki wataru would be like to ring out or to echo out, like in the space, basically, across the space. And then the women's high-pitched voices rang out, basically. My patron translated this as, and then the light soprano voices of the women resounded. This is great. I really like this translation. Aside from the maru at the end, again, change the punctuation. Resounded is a great way of translating hibiki wataru, to echo and ring out, resound. That's basically what that is. Again, you want to combine words whenever possible, just to make it cleaner and more concise, and frankly, just better English writing. Light soprano voices. I really like the use of soprano here. I mean, it's pretty common knowledge. I was going to say, if you're a singer, you know soprano means high-pitched women's voices, but I think everybody generally knows that. So yeah, like this is a great translation. This is a good sentence. What small Sarah did was I combined this with the former, and I left out the descent from the heavens. And I don't know why I did that. Again, I could have just overlooked it. Maybe it was in there and it somehow got deleted when I typed it up in the programming or whatever. But anyway, I translated those two sentences together as after the leader's voice, the voices of the other villagers continued. I don't know why I left out that they're men. And then the women's voices echoed. So I shortened, そして女たちの高音が響き渡る. I took out the 高音 altogether. I probably just didn't want to look it up. Or that they have too many kanji that I don't know. Like I knew those kanji, I'm sure, but like together I probably didn't know them. I probably looked up koon in my kanji in my dictionary, and there probably wasn't an entry. And I was like, I don't know what that is. Oh well, I'll just leave it out. Who knows? Anyway, and then once again they repeat 降り立ちたまえ。最後にまだ年若い少年少女らの透き通った声が加わった。I always mess up saying 加わった。加わった。最後に, so lastly, finally, in the end, まだ年若い, so still young in years or still young. 少年少女ら, so this ra is a plural basically, so boys and girls. 透き通った is like clear, crisp, especially for a voice or for eyes. 声が加わった. 加わった is like joined in, mixed in. So my patron translated this as, finally, the clear, youthful voices of children joined in. Japanese, period. No problem with this translation. This is pretty straightforward. This sentence is pretty straightforward. There's not really much of anything tricky in there. Small Sarah translated it as, and finally. I kind of like that. I kind of like the use of and sometimes to start sentences. Again, this is something you're told as a beginning English writer for creative writing. At least I was told this. You should never begin a sentence with and or but or other, conjunctions and things like that. And it's like, nah, they make your stuff flow a lot better. So I like and finally. I also like finally. They're both fine. The thin voices of the young boys and girls were added. So that's another way of saying it. I translated tsukitotta as thin instead of clear. That actually kind of works. They're both kind of the same thing. As in, they're bright, they're crisp, they're clear, they're oritachi tamae instead of oritachi tamae or oritachi tamae. They're very thin, very clear, crisp, like a bell. So, voices of the young boys and girls. So I translated shonen shoujora more literally as boys and girls. My patron translated it as just children. Again, simplified it. What is boys and girls? Children, kids, Who cares about their gender? So yeah, both of these are fine translations. Both of these are correct. They're very slightly different. Oop, and here comes my cat. She wants to help. And then a cat joined and said, meow, 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 meow. And then Tenko came and said, oh my goodness, what a cute kitty. I think I'll stop my plot of world domination and I will just, oh, no, she left. Okay, so here's the next sentence. 総勢204名の一族が大きなうねりとなり流れ続ける. All right, my patron left this blank. It stumped them. They didn't know how to translate this. I don't blame them. It's weird. So 総勢 means like in all or total. 204名 is just 200 people basically. No, so this 200 people in total is an adjective. It's a modifier for ichizoku, which is clan or tribe. So the tribe of 200 people in total is what that first part means. 大きなうねりとなり. So it's a long string of hiragana, and it's kind of hard to parse it out, actually, if you can't see that to is the particle that separates, and it's uneri space, to space, nari. This is where, like Japanese, why can't you use spaces? It makes it so much easier for learners. So an uneri is an undulation, or like a wave, a swell, a swelling. And then to nari, this nari is naru, the verb to become. So it becomes a big swell, a big undulation. Nagare tsuzukeru, so continues to flow. So the tribe of 200 became a big swell and continued to flow. That's the literal and very bad translation of that. So small Sarah translated that as, the voices of the whole tribe of 200 continued to sound as one. Not entirely complete there. I got the voices of the whole tribe of 200 and the continued. To sound as one, that's not exactly correct. I think small Sarah was probably also stumped by this uneri to nari. If there were spaces, probably would have been able to tell, swelled. So yeah, today would be like the voices of the whole tribe of 200 rose to a swell and continued. That's still not a great translation. Still need to workshop that a little bit. But yeah, basically the point is we're getting the information that there's a tribe of 200 and they're getting louder and louder and they're continuing to say oritachi tamae. And again, they say it again 2 times now. Oritachi tamae, oritachi tamae. Warera ga nushi yo. So this warera means us, we, and it's a very, again, like regal, noble. If you're a king and you're talking to your subjects, or you're a subject and you're talking to your king, like it's very noble speech. And the nushi is lord, so our lord. And then the yo at the end is we are addressing you humbly, sort of thing. So my patron translated this as, oh, our Lord, descend, descend from the heavens. This is great. This does a lot of really good things here. So I'd like to point this out. So notice how in Japanese, it's just literally descend from the heavens, our Lord. That's like literally what that would be. It sounds kind of robotic. It doesn't really sound that cool. And it's not like, we've been building to this moment, right? And then if you're like, descend from the heavens, oh, our Lord, or something, I don't know, it's weird. It's not that cool. So they combined the 2 descend from the heavens lines kind of together by going descend, descend from the heavens. I like that because it's concise, it's cutting out the fat, and it just sounds kind of cooler. And then the other thing that they did, which is really good, sometimes you really need to do this in translations of creative work. Notice how they flip-flopped. It used to be the command descend from the heavens, and then they say our Lord. They flip-flopped it to, oh, our Lord, descend, descend from the heavens. I like that a lot better because it breaks things up a little bit more. You're having all this descend from the heavens, descend from the heavens, descend from the heavens. If you start with, oh, our Lord, descend from the heavens, I just think it sings better, in English. Small Sarah just translated that as arise, our Lord. So Small Sarah had a similar idea here, I think. She's just like, they don't need to say it twice. That's a little weird in English. Just arise, our Lord. And that's fine too. It's correct, technically. Okay, now, brace yourselves, because we have a long run-on sentence with lots of onomatopoeia in it. I mentioned at the beginning of this video that we'd be dealing with onomatopoeia in a narrative context. Usually you might have seen onomatopoeia in manga, you know, the sound effect panels. And sometimes you have it in like character dialogue too. It's freaking everywhere in Japanese, but you don't always want to translate it like as sound effects, as you're going to see. So this is a very long sentence. Soyo tomo kaze no nakatta yami no naka, comma. So this is the first little bit. Kigi ga sawa sawa to oto o tate hajime, comma again. Kokue o minimatotta ichizoku ga hizamazuku kohan ni, that's like another part, hita hita to chisana nami ga yose hajimeta. That's one big, long, run-on sentence. All right, let's parse it out a little bit. So, soyo tomo kaze is like a light breeze, a shallow breeze. No nakatta, so lacking a shallow breeze. There was no shallow breeze. And that whole phrase is being used to describe yami no naka. So inside of the darkness, amid the darkness is a better translation of that. So amid the darkness that formerly didn't even have like a whisper of wind. I was a little too poetic with that translation, but like, you know, amid the darkness that did not have a soft breeze in it. Kigi ga, the trees. Sawa sawa to, so here's our first onomatopoeia. Sawa sawa is a rustling sound effect. You may have also heard zawa zawa, which is also rustling, but it's like louder. Sawa sawa is like you think of the rustling of the trees in a very light breeze. Sawa sawa, sawa sawa, kind of like that. So a light rustling. And often you'll have a to after an onomatopoeia. So sawa sawa to. So with a sawa sawa sound, with a rustling sound, oto o tate, make a sound, hajime. So begin to make a sound. So the trees began to make a light rustling sound. Kokue o minimatotta. So minimatou is to just wear on your person, on your body. Kokue, if you look at the kanji, it's very clear. It's a black cloak, black clothing. Kokue o minimatotta ichizoku. So the clan with black cloaks on their bodies. Ga hizamazuku. So I have to call myself out here. I typed this out myself because I don't have a word processed copy. This is out of print, by the way, like good luck finding this. I think this is probably one of the last copies in existence. But anyway, yeah, I typed this out by hand, and this was a typo when I sent this to my patrons to look at for this video. I left out one of the syllables on hizamazuku, so absolutely no fault of my patron for missing that, but hizamazuku is to kneel. So hizamazuku kohan ni, so kohan is the lakeside. So the tribe wearing black cloaks kneeling by the lake. Ni, so at this lake where the tribe wearing black cloaks knelt. Hita hita to, so hita hita is like a lapping sound effect, like lapping in water, like tick 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 tick, like that kind of sound effect. Hita hita to, chisana nami ga, so small waves, yose hajimeta, began to come together, began to like go to the shore and back and together and stuff. So this whole long run-on sentence, we've parsed it out, we've got all the parts. Let's see how Small Sarah and Patron translated that. Patron, in the gentle, windless darkness, so that's soyo tomokaze no nakatta yami no naka. In the gentle, windless darkness. That's a good way of handling that. Soyo tomokaze no nakatta is just windless, right? You don't need to say in the darkness that previously didn't have a gentle wind. Just say windless. Much easier, much less wordy. The trees began to rustle. So again, you don't say with a sawa noise. The trees began to make noise. That's like literally how you translate that, but just the trees began to rustle. Simplify. The black-clothed clan huddled. So this is where hizamazuku, if that had been correctly typed in there by myself, I'm sure my patron would have translated this as the black-clothed clan knelt. Did not say knelt by the lakeside, but that's okay. We're going to put the lakeside part in later. So the black-clothed clan huddled, kokue o mi ni matotta ichizoku ga hitamatsuku, as small waves began to lap against the lakeside. So the lakeside part, we put that at the end. And I think this was a smart move, because otherwise, if you kept it in the Japanese order and said the black-clothed clan knelt by the lakeside as small waves began to lap, where? You know, you'd have to mention the lake again, or the water, as the small waves began to lap against each other in the lake or whatever. You'd have to mention lake twice and it would be very wordy. So putting lakeside at the end was really smart. Small Sarah translated this as, and then, I kind of added and then in there. In the once windless darkness, so I kind of went a little more literal there, Small Sarah did. Soyo tomokaze no nakatta. So that was like the once windless darkness instead of just the windless darkness. But noteworthy that we both did windless, which I think was a good move. The trees began to sway. I like that, sway. Sway, rustle, you know, it's kind of the same thing. If the trees are swaying, they're going to rustle. If the trees are rustling, it's probably because they're swaying. And the tribe, comma, clothed in black, comma, versus the patron translation, the black-clothed clan. I think the tribe, comma, clothed in black, comma, is a little more natural sounding than the black-clothed clan, although the black-clothed clan is a bit more like, I don't know, concise, like clumped together. They're both fine and they're both correct. I today personally prefer, and the tribe, comma, clothed in black, comma, instead of the black-clothed clan. Kneeled by the lake, shouldn't that be knelt? I think it would be knelt by the lake, or both of them are probably correct. Kneeled by the lake, comma, which was starting to form small waves. So see, I did the thing, Small Sarah did the thing, where I mentioned that the tribe is kneeling by the lake, and then I mentioned that there's water, like lapping. But I translated that like lapping concept as just which was starting to form small waves. I just kind of took out the sound effect there. And you can totally do that sometimes. You can just like, sometimes the sound effects are used to just paint the picture in your mind of what the thing is doing. If you say the lake is lapping, making a lapping sound, then that paints a picture in your mind. Oh, the waves are kind of doing this. They're starting to get choppy. That's probably how I would translate that today. I probably would do something involving like choppy or rippling or something like that. Waves, I think ripple or choppy is a little more the kind of verb or an adjective we're looking for. Again, both of these translations are technically correct. They're just a little different. Here's some more onomatopoeia for you. Shounen wa gyutto, that's one onomatopoeia, haha no te o nigitta. So shounen, the boy, gyutto, gyut is a sound effect for squeezing, especially like squeezing a hand or squeezing onto the hem of someone's clothing. So gyutto, haha no te o nigitta. So you could remove the gyutto, shounen wa haha no te o nigitta. The boy clasped his mother's hand. But if you add the gyutto, it adds the extra descriptiveness of he's like tightly clenching her hand. And that carries with it some idea of, oh, maybe he's scared, maybe he's insecure, maybe he's excited. Like if you'd grip tightly, you'd have this emotionality or this urgency associated with it versus just if he just grabbed her hand or just took her hand, like that could mean a lot of different things. So let's continue. There's one more sentence. Ha kata kata to, another onomatopoeia, naridashita. So ha is teeth, kata kata is a chattering, rattling noise. So kata kata to, again we have the to after all of these onomatopoeia, gyutto, kata kata to, hita hita to, sawa sawa to, naridashita. So naridasu, to naru in this case, if you look at the kanji, it's to ring, to like make a noise, to ring out. Naridasu is like really to ring out. So rang out, basically. So his teeth rang out with a chattering noise, basically, with a kata kata. So my patron translated those two sentences as, the boy grasped his mother's hand, period. His teeth began to chatter, period. Two sentences. Small Sarah translated that as, the boy tightly squeezed his mother's hand, period. His teeth were chattering, period. These are both correct, and these are both like pretty good translations. So Small Sarah added tightly squeezed his mother's hand. So I wanted to make sure that that was really emphasized. I assume that he was tightly squeezing her hand. But my patron's translation of grasped, I would say today I would probably translate it as gripped or clenched, because that implies like squeezing tightly. Like neither of those translations I think are quite like gyutto nigiru. It's more like to grip or to like clench. But it both gets the point across a little bit. His teeth began to chatter versus his teeth were chattering. I kind of prefer Small Sarah's here. And I think this is really just remnants of how I was trained to write in school as a child. Some of you who grew up in the US might remember this too. Were you taught that it's just bad writing to say began to do a verb or decided to do a verb? It's like, it's kind of weak if you say I began to run or I began to sing or my teeth began to chatter. It's kind of weak. At least that's what I've been told. I don't know for sure if that's actually true. It's one of those things that like, maybe that's just something that English teachers teach beginning writers, but it's actually not an ironclad rule and you can totally break it. So again, it's not wrong. It's just, I think I'm biased because that's how I was taught that you're not supposed to write. You're not supposed to say began to, unless it really makes sense that like he's beginning to. In this case, I think just his teeth were chattering is fine versus his teeth began to chatter. Ooh, clatter. My patron translated that as clatter versus chatter. Yeah, they're both kind of the same thing. Clatter probably is a little bit better. Chatter to me kind of also implies like chat, like I'm talking, chatting. So clatter might be a little bit better. But yeah, it's again the same thing, and they're both technically correct translations. They're just slight differences here. And that brings us to the end of part 1 of Let's Translate Light Novels. Believe it or not, that was just one page of this light novel. That's the pace we're going to be going at in this series. Thank you all for watching, and thank all of my patrons for helping me produce this series. I'd like to give a special shout out to Greg, Lay, and Henry Roaming. If you want to help support this channel, this series, me, pay my rent, you can visit my Patreon. The links to all those lovely things are in the video description below. I have no official sign-off for this series, so I'll just wave awkwardly with both of my hands.